Welcome to NVC Life. I'm Rachelle Lamb, veteran NVC trainer and relationship coach, helping listeners navigate interpersonal conflict and ground more deeply into relational living. Greetings, fellow humans. Today, I'd like to give some airtime to opinions, the way we hold them and ultimately prize them. More than anything, though, I'd like to wonder about why we often defend them as fiercely as we do. We are, each one of us, entitled to our own opinions, viewpoints, and paradigms. So we say, and so we're told. The thing is, our opinions, viewpoints, and theories significantly shape and determine the choices we make and the lifestyles we strive towards. And none of these, though intangible at the outset, are without consequence. Opinions, for the most part, roll off our tongues as if our viewpoints were a benign, innocuous force. And I'm wondering, are they? I'm thinking of a situation, for instance, where an individual views the world as inert and essentially a mass of resources for human consumption and exploitation. That the world operates in this way is the person's opinion and belief. And I wonder, what right does such a person, or on a larger scale, what right does a corporation that holds that belief have to determine both the present and future of those who see the world as alive, precious, and in need of protection? A world where trees, rivers, and salmon are not resources, but instead relatives. To be fair, I could argue the reverse and ask, what right do those who see the world as alive, precious, and in need of protection have to determine both the present and future of those who view the world as inert and essentially as a mass of resources for consumption and exploitation? An interesting dilemma, isn't it? I ask these questions to invite reflection on the dilemma of the survival of the human race and of life itself. Where one positions themselves in terms of their relationship to life determines a great deal. Or to break it down simply, either a person holds the care of life central, or they hold their personal needs, inclinations, and interests as central. The way that a person lives and relates is an indicator of their orientation, in the same way that the manner in which societies run and are run is also an indicator of its core values. Now, this is not to say that personal and human needs must be sacrificed in order to care for life. It is to say, however, that placing one's primary attention on human needs without concretely holding the care for life as a core and central value will more likely than not result in citizens losing the interest and capacity to care for life. All we need to do is look around us. It's already happened. It's already happening. How true is it then that we are entitled to our views and opinions and the manifest lifestyle choices that flow from those views? The lens through which decisions are made inside a corporate boardroom or widget manufacturer is markedly different from the lens through which decisions are made from inside a mud and grass dwelling, built entirely from materials found in the immediate surroundings and adhering to a 150,000-year-old way of life. We, in the modern technological world, pride ourselves on the freedom to think whatever we want without recognizing that our views and their associated actions spring largely from an unexamined lens and mindset. In 1896, Merrill E. Gates, member of the U.S. Board of Indian Commissioners and advocating for educating indigenous peoples in the ways of the white man, spoke the following in a speech on Indian reform. We have to begin with the absolute need of awakening in the savage Indian broader desires and ampler wants. To bring him out of savagery into citizenship, we must make the Indian more intelligently selfish before we can make him unselfishly intelligent. We need to awaken in him wants. In his dull savagery, he must be touched by the wings of the divine angel of discontent. The desire for property of his own may become an intense educating force. The wish for a home of his own awakens him to new efforts. Discontent with the teepee and the starving rations of the Indian camp in winter is needed to get the Indian out of the blanket and into trousers, and trousers with pockets in them, and with a pocket that aches to be filled with dollars. So how are Gates' words any different from present-day marketing strategies attempting to generate wants in unsuspecting audiences that will turn them into loyal customers? Does this one precious world that we live in, with its non-negotiable conditions as determined by nature, have room for the ever-growing myriad of viewpoints being acted upon where the primary criteria is that they don't violate human-made laws? And what are the long-range consequences when human laws are in large part underwritten by corporate interests and the dominant culture consumer machine that make it all too easy to override and violate the laws of nature? I'm entitled to my opinion. Let me frame it another way. I'm entitled to my views. I'm entitled to my prejudices. I'm entitled to my biases. I'm entitled to my attitude. I'm entitled to my personal truth. I'm entitled to my judgment. I'm entitled to my reaction. I'm entitled to my assumptions. I'm entitled to my beliefs. I'm entitled to my conclusions. And I'm entitled to have each one of these remain unchallenged in order to feel safe. And these days, I can sign up for pretty much any personal development program and come away with a fortified sense of self and strengthened capacity to assert when pressed. I have a need for respect for my autonomy and my views. End of conversation, which is typically how it goes. The colliding of differing opinions in most cases signals the end of engagement and the unwillingness to think and wonder beyond the horizons of what we have established as true in our own minds. Because to think beyond the safety of our own horizon is risky business. We might see things differently, and seeing things differently messes with our capacity to remain in our lives, jobs, relationships, etc., as they are presently structured. It represents upheaval and chaos, and most of us don't like change unless it's change we personally invite. Opinions, attitudes, beliefs uphold and justify our choices and actions. They are the scaffolding of our day-to-day lives. But what happens when we don't regularly check and test the scaffolding that our lives are built upon? Is it not the obligation of a responsible culture to shape the viewpoints of its citizens in accordance with natural law, in accordance with the way of life as it exists and must exist in order to remain vital and capable of sustaining life, instead of shaping them to be bound to a system and status quo that is exploitative and harmful to life? Every day, the world speaks 1,000 languages about how things are for those willing to listen. Clouds, winds, tides, seasons, birdsong, bees, fish, grasses, woodland. The exchange is enormously rich. The consequence of being removed from that direct contact and the naturally occurring ways of engaging that accompany uncontaminated direct contact is disconnection. A disconnection that sets the stage for us to think whatever we wish and call it an achievement, instead of recognizing it as a poverty. We call it freedom of self-expression when it may more correctly be viewed as a tragic symptom of disconnection from the real and living world. The war between man and nature is no longer obvious to us as it probably once was. We now live in a post-war era of man against nature. Or, more accurately, we live inside the trauma of having gone to war with nature and tragically prevailing, at least for now. What does the trauma look like? It's hard to recognize at first, especially given how many seek out its seductive self-serving benefits. It is the ability to purchase anything you like, go anywhere you want, and schedule your time in any way you wish, or at the very least to perceive that level of choice and freedom as a worthwhile pursuit. Ease, convenience, and endless choice. what many of us unconsciously chase every day. We're either chasing the perfect lifestyle, reveling in it, or looking for ways to add to it. That's the trauma. That's the trauma, and it doesn't much look like trauma as we typically frame it. We understand trauma as violence, suicide, depression, addiction, mental illness. I'm suggesting that these more obvious ailments are symptomatic of living in a society where having or wanting beyond what is basic and sane for humans is promoted as a way of life. And that it is the promoting and striving for this way of life that is the trauma. As author Martin Prechtel writes in his book, The Unlikely Peace at Cuchumaquik, The Parallel Lives of People as Plants, Keeping the Seeds Alive. The word irreality is not intended to signify what is usually meant by unreal, not real, or ethereal. Irreality is used to denote the strange and unfortunate collective condition whereby an utterly unhealthy, non-sane, unnatural, totally synthetic, technologically choreographed environment with no awareness or regard for the holy in nature becomes the cultural environment of a people who, without questioning it, live in its trance, accepting it all as perfectly normal. End quote. The values of a capitalist society pave the way for the real estate of opinion to be as real, no, actually more real than solid ground. Here's my theory. Opinion isn't a display of intelligence or cleverness. Opinion is born out of necessity to establish a ground to stand on when real connection to real ground has been severed and lost. Whether or not an individual or societal lens is solid is irrelevant, because the real ground that we rely on to live is nowhere to be seen in our day-to-day lives as something to be respected, revered, and cared for. The values of a capitalist society pave the way for the real estate of opinion to be as real, or actually more real, than solid ground. With the very recent and exponential rise in technological developments, we can turn almost any thought and dream into reality. There's very little that a person cannot accomplish if they have the will, resources, and materials. And where resources and materials are not available due to circumstances involving injustice, social justice activists are frequently engaged in paving the way for increasing numbers of people to have access to those resources and materials. I'm not saying we shouldn't have opinions or think independently. I'm saying we need to think critically about our lenses, frameworks, and opinions, and that we need to test them regularly in the context of what serves life if, in fact, we want future generations to live on a healthy planet, which I do, and I hope you do too. Are the opinions I hold dear ultimately life-serving or merely me-serving? And does my definition of life-serving refer primarily to human life or to all life? In other words, when expressing an opinion, am I placing the spotlight on myself and what I would like, or am I placing it on life and what life needs? There is no doubt that the human mind is a wondrous thing. What a gift to be able to think, to imagine, and create. But untethered to life, untethered to its realities and consequences, the mind can lose its way, can perceive itself to have free rein and set things into motion that produce tragic and life-threatening outcomes. Is this my opinion? I suppose you could say it is, but I prefer to think that I'm simply giving voice to what I see. In closing, I'm wondering, how do opinions ultimately serve life? Do opinions stand in for something that we have lost track of? If a person lives in accordance with nature, is opinion even necessary? What do you think? Thank you for tuning into NVC Life. For future episodes, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube. For free resources or to book a private session with me, head over to RachelleLamb.com. Until the next time, stay sane, grateful, and generous.